Hey, John here from Pawsome University. Why do salted sidewalks hurt dogs' paws? Let's find out. We already know most snowmelt products are dangerous for dogs to ingest, but I want to talk about something different today. I want to talk about the hazards of caustic burns. Yeah, salted sidewalks can burn your dog's paws, but how? To answer that question, we need to first understand why we salt our sidewalks. If you're not from the northern part of the United States where we get snow all the time, you might not be familiar with the practice, but we use salt to melt ice. And basically, when it snows and you shovel, you have to throw salt down. Otherwise, overnight, ice will form from the runoff from the snow that then freezes overnight. And a lot of people who are super lazy don't want to shovel the whole way, so they just throw a bunch of salt down, and then they're left with a slushy, messy, disgusting sidewalk. That's besides the point. But it's important to note here that salt doesn't melt ice. It drops the freezing temperature of water. So what does that mean? That means you have a bunch of water that's frozen at 32 degrees. And then all of a sudden, 32 degrees is no longer the freezing point. Now it might be 16 degrees. So all that ice now needs to transform to water. The energy needs to go somewhere. This is where it gets a little complicated. And we're going to go down a quick chemistry rabbit hole. That was weird. Bear with me. It's not going to be too invasive, but we are going to cover a little bit of chemistry here to better understand what's going on behind the scenes that's causing these injuries to their paws. So when pure water is kept at its freezing point, you have a bunch of molecules that are breaking off and turning into a liquid state, but at the same time, you have a bunch of molecules, the same amount of molecules that are going from a liquid state to a frozen state. So what that means is think of a room of 50 people, and every 30 seconds, one person walks out and another person walks in. You're always going to have 50 people in that room. It's never going to change. The state of that room never changes. And it's the same thing with ice. When water is at its freezing temperature, molecules that are breaking down at the same exact time, there's molecules that are coming together. It's an endless cycle, and that's how we have ice. That's how water takes its solid state. Then we introduce salt. And this is where it gets interesting. The freezing temperature then, like we discussed earlier, drops. And as that ice melts, because its freezing temperature is now lower than the temperature that it is, that water that runs off will then dissolve the salt, create a salt brine. And the more salt that's dissolved into that brine, the less concentration of water molecules you have. When you have a less concentration of water molecules, the freezing rate will drop. It will not freeze as fast. Like we talked about, the freezing point is lower and the freezing rate is lower because it's less concentrated. There's a bunch of salt molecules in that brine. It's no longer just water. But at the same time, the melting rate is entirely unaffected by this whole salt situation. So that means that the ice is going to continue to draw heat from its environment to melt. That's an important part here. Ice draws heat. What that means is if you held an ice pack on your arm, that ice pack is going to pull the heat out of the cells in your arm. It's going to pull the heat out of the air around you, and it's going to utilize that heat to help break down those molecules and change from its solid state to its liquid state. So that's a really key thing here. Ice absorbs heat. And like we talked about before about the salt brine, the freezing rate has decreased. And what the freezing rate decreasing means is that because the freezing rate has decreased, like we talked about earlier, less heat is being added to the system. This results in a plummeting of the temperature of the ice itself and the brine around it, and it could get as low as -6 degrees Fahrenheit. And this happens really, really fast. If you've seen on YouTube the ice salt challenges, I don't know what people were thinking, but they were getting second, third degree burns in 30 seconds, a minute. It does not take long because the temperature drops that fast and this heat from the cells is pulled away that fast. But let's get back to dogs. When your dog walks on a salted sidewalk and then onto ice, that mixture quickly causes pain and damage to the pads on the bottom of their feet. And it happens in two phases. The first phase is that melting phase that we talked about. So that melting phase is pulling the heat out of the cells in the pad. After that, you also have the temperature of the brine itself. You already have cold cells now, and you're going to add an additional layer of cold that could be anywhere from 16 degrees Fahrenheit to -6 degrees Fahrenheit. So you end up with second and third degree burns, frostbite. So what can you do as a dog owner, It's a good dog mom, good dog dad. If your dog will tolerate them, we recommend booties. Those little slip-on covers that go on their paws, that'll help insulate them. It'll help not having their paws absorb any of that brine or have direct contact with the skin. And that'll insulate and trap the heat inside of the booty so that the heat isn't drawn away from the pad. That's where most of the damage is coming from. But a lot of dogs do not tolerate booties well, or maybe you just don't have them on hand. You never thought you'd need them. What you can do is when you go on your walks, avoid treated roads, avoid treated sidewalks, and if you do need to walk past them, have your dog walk on the snow. On the front lawn of the property or on that strip of grass, should still be covered with snow. They can walk on that, or you can bring a hand towel with you. And as you walk, if you pass a section with a bunch of treated sidewalks, stop, clean off their pad, and then continue your walk. One important thing to note, a huge safety hazard, is if you notice blood. If you notice blood as they're walking, you see a little track of blood in the snow, that's a serious problem. If you've seen the Christmas Story where the kid puts his tongue on the pole and it gets stuck, the same thing can happen to an open wound on the bottom of your dog's paw, and that'll continue to happen. It'll continue to fuse to the ground and then rip off and fuse and rip off and get a worse and worse injury. So if you notice blood, end the walk immediately. If you can carry your dog, if they're small enough, carry your dog. If you can't, figure out a way to get them back home, but do not continue to walk them in freezing conditions and on salt brine, salt treated sidewalks, because the injury is going to be really, really bad and it can turn catastrophic. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and share with a friend, and stay safe out there with your dogs. Until next time, class dismissed.